So for those of you visiting, let me just color in the picture. We've been doing this now for a few weeks. This is our third week, yes. We've invited those in our community to share their stories of how their culture, how they grew up, and how they received the gospel has impacted their lives, and how they perceive the world, and how God is forming them in this concerning race, culture, and all the other topics that tend to keep it divided, because we feel a very strong prompting from the Lord that says we need to pursue oneness. And the heart behind this is not for us to grow in condemnation or to feel bad, but to celebrate who we are, to celebrate the culture we have been born into, and then to go, God, where to from here? How do I live this out to the glory of God and for the kingdom of God? So both these ladies I love a lot. Both of them are old chauffeur faces, and the journey of just watching them in the body of Christ, always growing, always giving of themselves, is remarkable. So I'm not going to chat too long, but I heard Estelle say, Nyameka, you go first. So I'm going to hand over to Nyameka so that she can tell us her story. Thank you, Nyameka.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Just a bit about my story. So I am from the Eastern Cape, probably like most Xhosa people in Cape Town. I am from the Eastern Cape. I was born there in a very small town called Sterkspruit. And I remember in my household, so I grew up as the only child. My mom only had me as a child. And then when I was 18, then my mom adopted my sister. So I grew up as an only child, but the house was full. You know, it was me and my cousins. We just had fun. I remember every night my great-grandmother would make us pray, and I hated it. But now I see the benefit. You know, she would make us pray every night, and she was very sneaky in the sense that she'd always say, you pray for yourself, I'm not going to pray for you. And just over the years, I've seen how important that has been for me. So where I grew up, there was not much exposure to other cultures at all. It was just me and the Xhosa people that I lived with. And then at the time that I was growing up, there was the influx, I guess, of foreign people also coming in. There wasn't like something that we said, we didn't say anything, it was not talked about, but there was that general looking down upon on anybody that obviously did not look like us, did not sound like us. And I remember there was a few people there in the community where I was. And obviously I'd never met white people before. I remember when there was a dance crew that came to my school while I was still in primary school. And when they came, there was one white guy. My goodness, all of us were like, oh, he's a white guy, he's right in front of us. We literally went to touch him. Oh my goodness, he's got flesh like we do. And it was very interesting to meet, obviously, other cultures and the white culture. And even then, like I said, with the foreign culture, also with the white culture, it wasn't something that was said. I don't think it was overtly said, but it was something that was sort of understood that obviously the white culture is always better and I guess more successful than we were, or something like that. And I grew up, like I said, I grew up in a Christian home. I was part of a Sunday school, and obviously I knew all the Christian scriptures as a child we were taught. And I think when I was about 7 or 8, I definitely believe I received my call into full-time ministry. It's another story right there, but I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't know what it was at the time. But now looking back, I definitely realized that it was just like a divine moment that I had with the Lord about calling me into full-time ministry. And then when I was about 15 years old, I moved from Eastern Cape, Eastern Cape to a place called Virginia, Free State. So I was always a year ahead in my studies. I was always a year ahead than the general, I guess, law of South Africa. And I remember when I moved into a multiracial school. I was supposed to do grade 11 because I passed my grade 10, but because obviously there's a suspicion that, oh, she might be from a black school, she probably doesn't know anything. So I had to actually repeat grade 10. Then I actually was caught up. I wasn't behind, I had caught up with, I guess, the rules of the education system in South Africa. It was new. Everything was new at the time for me. The black people were speaking Sotho, which I didn't understand, and the white people were speaking Afrikaans. So I went into a multiracial school. And really, I think it's one of the very first places where I felt rejection. First of all, from my ethnical background, because I'm a Xhosa person. Like I said, the black people, they spoke Sotho, and really, like, you know how children are. Children are probably, even just teenagers at the time, they are very honest in their expression, so they're going to literally say how they feel, and if they don't like you, they don't like you. So the black people didn't like me because of my Xhosa speaking. I had to quickly learn how to speak Sotho, which I did. I learned that, so my ethnical background came into the fore, and obviously, as a black person, in a predominantly white Afrikaans school, so also another language thing that was there was the Afrikaans, as the fact that I was obviously felt rejection because of my ethnical background and also the color of my skin. So I went into the school. I remember the time when we went there, it was about 80% black. 80% white and 20% black. I remember the second year, it was 50-50. And the third year, it was about 95% black. So, so I finished my matric, came to Cape Town. I felt my ethnical and racial scope expanded again. Remember, that one wasn't such a big scope, but now it expanded again. And when I came to Cape Town, I don't know, I guess it's just my personality. I just had friends from all over the place, friends from other African countries. I intentionally, if I think about it, I remembered my childhood where it wasn't like a mentioned thing about just looking down on other African people. I intentionally, without even thinking about it, I intentionally made friends. When I was at varsity with friends, I had friends from Angola, I had friends from Zimbabwe, I had friends from Zambia, I had friends from Nigeria, just making it intentional about the fact that whatever it is that was sort of put in my mind without even me realizing it was put in my mind. I wanted to go against that grain. And I had friends. I remember there was an exchange student at my university who was from the United States, and I believe he was my very first friends from the United States, and I actually now have a lot of friends from the United States. Obviously, you realize there's always a shift. I guess it's always been the shift, but I noticed the shift. Racially and ethnically. I remember in 2008, it had never, maybe it has actually, I'd always felt, people would always ask me, like, are you South African? Black people would ask me, are you South African? Where are you from? Stuff like that. And it was sort of, at first it felt very weird, because obviously I'm South African. How can you not know I'm South African? How can you not know I'm Xhosa? But I always kept on being asked that question, if I'm South African, people always, where are you from? I'm like, I'm Eastern Cape. They're like, oh, really? I didn't think you were from the Eastern Cape. So I remember vividly, I worked in the townships. I worked in Khayelitsha and Nyanga, Langa, and I was taking a taxi. It was during the xenophobic attacks. And I'm sitting in the taxi, I'm quiet, I'm not saying anything to anyone. And I remember they were just talking about, no, we should hit them, we should do this, we should do this, we should do that. And I'm not saying anything, I'm not thinking anything. So this lady next to me, she's like, are you not afraid? I'm like, of what? It's like, they're talking about killing you. I'm like, I am a Xhosa person. I responded to her in Xhosa. I was like, no, I am Xhosa. Yes. So even just my own people sort of did not recognize me. so to speak. And I remember in 2015, I remember vividly as well. I would always cry myself to sleep. I remember it was a month of May. I don't remember why. I don't know why I remember it, but I remember just crying myself to sleep and praying and saying, Lord, there's got to be something that has to be done in South Africa about race, about culture. We are definitely not moving in the right direction. We are moving in a direction that is taking us back, and there's got to be something. And I remember every single day in that time, and I remember the scripture that was in my head at that moment was Ephesians 5. I think it talks about the importance of time. I can't remember exactly what it says, but it was talking about the importance of time, that, the time is now. We need to do something. And I really just prayed about it, and yeah, I think that's my story. You can ask me questions. I'm not good at talking about myself.
So, Nyameka, it's interesting, hey, that we sometimes, our hurts come out of our own culture and not just from other cultures. That's very insightful for me. I want to know your journey. We had an organization called Lenses here a month or so ago, 2 months ago, and they did an unbelievable morning of discussion and workshopping with us on the topic of race and culture and ethnicity. You were such an important part of us coming to that point. Would you mind sharing that journey of Lenses and how it came about that you are in our church for so many years and what you've seen God do in you and in the church over the last few years?
Lenses or the church? Do you want me to answer? Both. All right, so...
Journey with both.
So I came to know about Shofar from I had a roommate, and my roommate, my housemate, she's still alive. At the time, I felt the Lord just, in the previous church I was in, just moving me in a different direction. And I remember just, going to churches. I was like, Lord, I'm not a church hopper. I don't like church hopping. For me, I like to be settled in a church. And I'd been going to churches, and my housemate basically said, why don't you come to... Actually, I told her, I was like, why don't I come to your church? That was like 2011, so 11 years ago. And I went in the church. Obviously, okay, I need to mention my housemate is white, the one that I stayed in 2011. And so she took me to Shofar. And when I got in, it was the Malaudis. I think they were the only people of color that I recognized. But it felt like coming home. I remember instead of going to other churches, I just continuously went to Shofar. And I remember this one time in the morning, I was like, Lord, I'm not a church hopper. I need a home to settle in. And the Lord said, why don't you join Shofar? I was like, I'm not forgetting the pink elephant in the room. The Malaudis are the only other black people. And if they're not there, then I'm the only one that is black. And the Lord just said, join Shofar. And I never heard him say anything. You know how the Lord speaks. He will just give you a directive, and he will not explain his directive. And that was how it was for me. And just enjoying the growth. I very felt accepted, very felt loved. I really didn't feel any different. But I think at the times, I think you all know, with black people, music plays a pivotal role in us. Even this morning, with me, you hear me before you see me in my car. Like literally, I play hip hop, like a Christian hip hop. I just play music. like literally. So that's how it is. And so it was a big deal for me. I think the music thing was like, man, I wish I could, my kind of music would be played. Not hip hop, obviously, but yeah, but like, so it was just that whole thing, that desire to have, because I mean, then, it would just feel like it was a complete picture. And so a few years ago, 2018, so I told Ross, so I work for Campus Crusade for Christ, an organization, Christian organization, and while he was there, he didn't know why I was in Pretoria, but he called me and I said, Ross, this is the thing that we're doing. It's lenses, we're doing it for our own stuff, whole stuff in South Africa. It's such an amazing thing. And Ross was like, when you come back to Cape Town, let's meet, I want to hear about this. And I just told him everything of all of what happened. It was a 5-day experience, and it was, man, we saw the move of God. We saw God just doing things spiritually, emotionally, just bringing us together in a way that had never happened before. And I remember my prayer in 2015 was like, Lord, there's got to be something that needs to happen. I remember that it felt very close to that, like this is something that we can do. So the rest is history with Chauffeur and lenses.
Can I quickly ask you, on that first lenses experience, those 5 days, you told me a story of a lady that sort of felt, but she's tired of saying sorry. Would you mind sharing that story?
Yes. So the event is very much conversational. There's conversations that happen. So I remember I asked something. It's an older Danny. I asked something to the group, and in her voice, I heard frustration, I heard tiredness, I heard just defeat, I heard so many things. And she said, how many times must I apologize? I've apologized for apartheid so many times, but how many times must I apologize? And then I just said to her, actually, it's not so much an apology that I'm looking for. I'm looking for an opportunity for you to stand in the sun with me, feel my pain, understand my story, see where I come from, and just walk with me. That's all I'm asking for at this moment in time. Because yes, you can apologize, you can say you're sorry, but you move on, right? You don't really like feel what the other person is feeling. And within that event, I just learned the Afrikaans culture's historical struggles as well with the Anglo-Boer War. It was just like a tangible moment where the Lord moved both the black, there was an Indian guy, colored and white, and just moving us, just a move of God where we felt God was just taking us into a moment of restoration. And we all listened to each other's stories. We didn't, when you listen without wanting to say something, because I think, aren't we, all of us, don't we have the intention of wanting to listen, but you want to rebut what the other person is saying? What I felt there, we listened without wanting to say anything to rebut what the other was saying, or to basically say something back. You just listened, and you sat in the moment, and you listened. Yeah.
I think that's the beauty, and what we all walked away from that lenses afternoon of just discussing, really having discussion and having the word in front of us to go, it's not about being right or wrong, or it's about listening to each other. It's about carrying each other's burdens and growing in compassion for one another. And Nyameka, I want to honor you. Nyameka has been so unbelievably faithful and patient and kind in this community. And you are just such a gift, because we know you. It's a time and place such as this that you've been called to, and just the gift that you've been through pursuing this with us. And just it was such a miracle. We were going to have the Lenses conference just before 2020, and then lockdown came, and then the celebration and the joy when we eventually sat around the tables. and grew in understanding and compassion for each other, and it's just the start. Thank you so much, Nyameka. Is there anything else you still want to share?
Just yesterday, I was, just like a little story, because this is such a sensitive topic, you don't want to say your opinion, you want to say what Scripture says. So something that just was inspired to me yesterday in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 1. So Paul is, Peter is such a, you talked about him regressing in the first session you had, but he was actually a pioneer. Peter, the Lord used him as a pioneer for unity and diversity. So in Acts chapter 1, so actually as they were sitting there in the upper room, and there were people from different tribes, different backgrounds, the apostles, they were there, and then Peter, sorry. If I say Paul, you know that I mean Peter, hey? So, and he's sitting there, and he tells the apostles and the 120 others, that was like, remember the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember the 12 apostles. That's where the covenant is. We need one more person because Judas obviously had committed suicide. And then they prayed, and obviously the Lord rose up Matthias as one of the 12. And there was such unity and diversity there when they were together in the upper room. Different tribes, different nations. The Holy Spirit came like a gushing wind. Remember in Acts chapter 1, they are being promised that they will receive power when the Spirit comes. And in Acts chapter 2, there's this rushing, gushing wind, and everybody goes out in the morning speaking in a tongue that these people can understand. They're like, what is going on? But there was unity and diversity that was created in the moment. And the Holy Spirit comes in, and he descends on us when there is an acknowledgement of unity and diversity at once.
Thank you, Nyameka. Estelle, are you ready to tell your story?
I am. I'm really sorry. Mine, I'll cut out as much as I can. It's quite long because I'm old. Toby, I don't see Toby here. He said last time he's an old man, but I think I rival him in being the oldest person who's been up here thus far. And Toby, when you watch this, I too listen predominantly to RSG. So, I was born in 1971. So I've lived the first 23 years of my life was not in the democracy. The way early primary school was in an English double medium school in Port Elizabeth, which was wonderful. And then when I was 10 years old, we moved up to Gauteng, to what was then called Verwoerdburg. Today it's called Centurion, where I attended Verwoerdburg Hoërskool, also until I matriculated. But my whole world growing up was, I suppose it was a middle class Afrikaans, white upbringing, the one of the three traditional church, the Dutch Reformed Church, and we never, obviously I had absolutely no exposure to anything that didn't look, anybody who didn't look like me. The black or colored people that I encountered was the man who worked in the garden and the lady who worked in the house, and that was it. And that was just our normal. And thinking about it now is that to think that we were living in a country where more than 80% of the population wasn't white, but you never saw, everything, the TV, it was just as if we were the only people in the country. And also, if I think now about the history, it was very much, it was almost like I don't want to say indoctrination, but basically it's what it was. If I think about the history we learned in school, it was all about the Afrikaner and the struggle of the Afrikaner and the voortrekkers. And I remember the pictures of this, the Msilikats and Dingaan and anyway. And I mean, it was like we were almost taught we are like Israel. We are the chosen nation. We are it, God's chosen people. Which obviously, I mean, the Afrikaner is that pinprick in the whole. But anyway, so and we were like that was just how we were taught. And there was obviously, the Afrikaner people had struggles, and there are things, but I mean, we learned that day at the workshop with lenses, that there are things in each and every culture, including the Afrikaner culture, that is precious, that's godly. But there are things that must be rejected, and there are things that God wants to redeem. So even though I went through a phase where I wanted to reject everything because of what I saw, but the problem is we weren't given the truth. We were given a certain narrative growing up. I mean, obviously the stories, we were in school, we had a subject called jeugweerbaarheid. It's like youth, preparedness. We were always taught about the communists and the rooi gevaar and the swart gevaar, and obviously Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. You weren't even allowed to say his name or show pictures of him. And then in '83 also my friend from school heard there was a bombing in Church Street in which her father died. He worked for the military, there was that, and obviously it just fed into this, I wouldn't say we were racist, but we just our whole upbringing was, they were terrorists, and then, and we were on the right side. So, I even remember when I was in matric in 1988, I suppose they were then moving towards some kind of change, because obviously it couldn't go on forever like that. So I remember I was in matric, and then it was in the news that the government has now decided that non-white people may also go to movie theaters. It was like, and I still remember we had this history teacher, and he said, "You're going to see now. They're going to bring them in with buses." It's like this is, end of the world, black people will also be able to watch movies. That's just, actually that is where I grew up, 70s and 80s. Then, fast forward in '89, I go to Tuks University. And the first time in my life I meet a colored guy. He was from Eersterust in one of my classes. And he was actually, looking back, a very angry young man. And then he started showing me a different side of, the way he grew up and things. And all of a sudden I realized, and that is when I questioned everything. Then I thought, does God even exist? Because if all of this that I've been taught, and this is what's been going on, I questioned, everything that I was taught from, which was, and also in that time at University of Pretoria, I remember one time Evie de Klerk came to speak on campus, and there was this big, the young Afrikaans, I'm not sure if it was at that stage still the Conservative Party youth, but it was a right-wing Afrikaans uprising there, and they were very active, and they wouldn't let him speak. They literally, he didn't, in the end, he couldn't, because they just disrupted the whole thing. And I was so disgusted with that I thought, no, I must do something. So I joined. There was a small society, this Students for Democratic Society. We were I was the only Afrikaans person there. There was like a black girl from the township, and like a liberal English guy, and we were, and so I sort of became, I suppose, politically active in a sense, but we were, we had a little newspaper, but even, the way things were being, the two different cultures was for me very evident, because I was also on the official Paarderbay newspaper, and then we had our little newspaper where we wrote things freedom things, and the way that we I remember at the Paarderbij, it was like we grew up, the Afrikaans, you just keep your mouth shut, you do what you're told, you don't question authority, you just really, you wouldn't dare ask questions, like you go to the editorial meeting, you're doing that, and it's okay, it's done, everybody's happy, they know what they have to do. Now with the other meeting, now we on this, it was a total different culture, everybody has to have a chance to say what they think. So it took forever to get anything done. And for me, that was at that time quite irritating and frustrating, because I was like, just, do what you're told. But there was a whole different culture of everybody has to have a say. Everybody has to have, be able to voice, which I didn't at that stage, realize it, the importance of recognizing everybody. But anyway, so, and yeah, at that stage I was a raging feminist also. My favorite quote was, "A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle." Sorry, Liffy. I've seen the light since. I wasn't saved then. I was religious, but I wasn't saved. I didn't know the Lord. Then I came down to Stellenbosch, where I think I didn't really encounter, I was like more in that year of my life was more into socializing and partying and just having a good time. Also not really encountering anybody who looks, remote, not like me, because this is now 92, yeah. Then, in 94, I started my first day real job that wasn't waitressing at Parliament. And it was interesting because Parliament, because it went from the old tricameral where it was like the white, okay, obviously the black people didn't have any say. There was an Indian and a colored, and then the assembly, and then the white people who basically had all the say. The parliament, the new parliament in the democracy ballooned. It went from it was like 400 and something members in total, I think, overnight. So they had to appoint a lot of new people to do the work. So I was appointed as a committee secretary, and the section that we started in, it was obviously all white people. They were a handful, 5 or 6 at that stage. And then I was the only white person who was, we were like 4, I think, appointed then. I was the white, and then there were a young guy from Mthatha in the Eastern Cape, and then a black lady and another black guy. Okay, so we came into this environment, and yeah, it was I felt comfortable because, and this young guy, he's a lovely guy, still he was a Christian. He came from Mthatha, so he knew about as much Afrikaans as I knew Xhosa. We were, he didn't learn. And looking back now, I realized that how because like meetings, people just spoke Afrikaans because they were just used to speaking Afrikaans, and he wouldn't know what was going on. So I realized for him, and even the other 2, 3 people, but I mean they had, yeah. So we started, I taught him some Afrikaans words, he would teach me these Xhosa words, and so we started a friendship there. But I realized, yeah, those were interesting times. And then in a short few years, that was 94, so by 96 they'd realized that there were more than 50 committees now that needed to be serviced, and so we had a big drive and appointed about 40 new committee secretaries who had to be trained. So in a few years, the majority of the section now was black. I think in those 40, maybe there were 1 or 2 people who were white, who were appointed that time. And I still remember the shock in staff meetings. Now all of a sudden, because like I said, I was taught you just keep your mouth shut and you do what you're told, you don't question. So now all of a sudden, and I found it so unpleasant, people would question, like these young guys would question the manager, the boss, It's like, how? I would never dream of countering him. But anyway, and I was like, they questioned everything, and those, and no, but this or that. That was a major culture shock for me. Now being in the minority of the working environment also, and it disturbed me because and unfortunately, okay, then there was a time, 99, where okay, it's a long story. They decided they need to have like a level of middle management where between the committee secretaries and the managers. So they said, okay, they're going to appoint 8 or 9 like middle. Anyway, so I went for the interview also, and there I had an unfortunate experience now of something that I didn't before really, which was tribalism, where there was a lady, very senior in the institution from the Eastern Cape, a Xhosa lady, and but I mean, she was not a good person. Subsequently, she was charged and let go and whatever, but she had an agenda that those posts must be filled by these 9 or 8 Xhosa people from the Eastern Cape. She really, I mean, even the people from Gauteng, black people, didn't, she just said, these are the names, they must get the job. And so my boss still called me in and said, we're very sorry, but this is what Mrs. X now, this is how it is, so please just, and I wasn't having any of that, so I raised, lodged a grievance and asked for all the, because I believed I should have been one. But anyway, so there I dug a bit of a hole for myself. I ended up being appointed rightfully, but that was a very, that whole, I realized in my heart afterwards, because the lady, I was quite victimized quite a bit by her. And she was in the two levels above my immediate manager. So she was quite senior, and she really had it out for me. So it was very stressful those years. I worked very hard, and I realized that in my heart, I felt, because obviously, and that time, for the first time, I said, I'm gonna learn Xhosa. I'm gonna take lessons and learn to speak. And I realized afterwards the reason was so that I can know what people are saying about me. Because it was like, people, I was always thinking, oh, they're talking about me, but I didn't understand. So anyway, I was quite relieved when finally, after, in 2001, I resigned. And I had my first born, and I resigned. And the next phase of my cultural life map, about 9-10 years, is very small, because then I spent those years comfortably ensconced here in the northern suburbs, this side of the Boerewors curtain. So I wasn't exposed or confronted with any, thing that was different. And then in 2010-11, for various other reasons, I actually applied again to Parliament and had to go back to work full-time, and I went there. And then when I got there in 2011, I was literally in the section of 300 plus people. I was the only one who looked like me. And there was one English guy who was an admin assistant, on the other side, but like in my immediate, like outside of the building, I was the only white person. And the rest of the people were a mix of all over the country. And I still remember when I was given this, I'm going to work with this guy on this committee. And I remember I could see in his face, he was like, what a white woman. I could see, he was very polite and very reserved, but I could just see the horror when we were introduced that we're going to be working together. But anyway, so I'm really sorry. I know I'm going on very long. Okay, but fast forward a bit. Through the years, we've built, I've been fortunate or blessed to work in that environment and to be accepted and building relationships. I feel that is such a, I often wish that other white people, Afrikaans people from my background, could have the exposure that I have, because it's really like they just don't know, they just don't know people, and they're not exposed to people that don't look like them in other cultures. But early on in that 2012, 13, around there, we had to go away for Provincial Week preparations to KZN. So I was traveling around in a shuttle with few younger than me black guys. And I remember we had, and afterwards I was so offended and I was so hurt, and I thought, these guys are racist towards me, because we still had this conversations in the shuttle, because we would spend quite a few hours on the road traveling in the rural areas, and they were trying to explain to me, because I had this thing, okay, now it's over. I didn't support apartheid, because no white person now supported it. I wasn't part of anything. I was even a little bit politically active. I was like, I'm actually on your side, but they tried for me to understand just that I did benefit. I was advantaged, just to acknowledge that even, that there was an injustice, and I just wouldn't have anything of it. I was like, but it's now so many years after, get over it and move on. It's like, I had that, and I was so offended that they were we was actually arguing. So after that trip, I was my heart was, I was at unforgiveness in my heart, and I actually ignored the two of them who were in my direct. I just ignored them, and in the meantime, I'd gotten saved. After this year of partying in Stellenbosch, I'd gotten to know the Lord. So, okay, that was now I knew the Lord. And I remember when we were back at work, then for a while, and then the Lord said to my heart, but no, bless those guys, serve them, affirm them. And I didn't really want to, but then I started to do it because I really felt the Lord said, no, which then I did. And and that opened their hearts to me so much that they really blessed me subsequent to that. But then, and just like I said, working in that environment, getting to know the people, like my direct colleague, I love his family, he loves my family. We've served one another. And like the lady right next to me, she's from KZN, we really serve one another. We mourn together when our husband passed. We rejoice together when our kids, excel. But I didn't, so I was quite happy there for quite a while. And then just the last thing that, because I had like 6 phases on my life map. Sorry, I'm trying to. So the last phase, if I can call it that, was a few years ago when my kids had a history project at school, assignment on apartheid legislation. So that for history, they had to interview each 3 or 4 people or 2 or 3 people on the effect or impact that apartheid laws had on their lives. I think it was the Group Areas Act, the Bantu Education Act. There were a few, And through that, because obviously they went to DF Malan High School, so all their friends and their friends' parents looked like them. So I arranged for them to interview from my colleagues, like my manager and some people I work with, and also a colored lady that I got to know through running and gotten to be good friends with. So, and some of those interviews I either sat in or conducted on their behalf. And that was for me like such an eye-opening, that was like 3-4 years ago. And these people that have been loving me, accepting me, I've been working with, to hear the terrible stories, I was like, things that we don't know. We just think, okay, it's apartheid, get over it now, it's 20 years past or whatever. But like the man is older than me, just how he told of growing up on the farm and his dad being his hero and the strongest and the wisest, but the fear in his dad's eyes when the farmer, the boss, when he would come knocking, and that, those small or cruelties, which is actually traumatic for a child. Or my one colleague who lived in Bonnievale and then weren't allowed to go to school with the colored people. She speaks perfect Afrikaans and English. I knew her for quite a while before I realized she's actually Xhosa, because she looks and sounds like a colored person, but she was actually Xhosa, and so she couldn't go to school with her in Bonnievale anymore, so she had to be shipped out to the Ciskei, where she suffered terrible abuse, and things like that. Or my running friend, who I we've been good friends with for a long time, and we just the same. You know, when she and her husband got married, they couldn't buy the house that they now live in Kuils River because they were colored. They weren't allowed to own property. So they had to go through a whole, you know, it's just things like that we don't really, understand. Or I didn't really understand. And then I had such a gratefulness that these people who suffered, this through generations, the oppression and the dehumanization, that they actually accept me and love me still, even though I'm white. So it's like Nyameka said, it's acknowledging that there was terrible injustice, terrible cruelty, hurt, and people were really, less than human. I mean, I know people, I have a friend who said, but I grew up, I'm white, Afrikaans, but we didn't have money. My parents couldn't send me to university. But even that person has been able to build a career at Sanlam for 30 years. And the reason Sanlam was established was so that white Afrikaans kids could have a job when they leave matric. So it doesn't matter if you were poor or rich. If you were white, you were privileged. You had a step up. So that is why I know in my heart, I know affirmative action and those, it's like almost a swear word in certain Afrikaans circles or white circles. But I believe with my whole heart, and the way it is being implemented is not ideal, it's not effective. People are being put in places where they maybe cannot handle, people aren't maybe coached correctly. But I believe with all my heart that there is a need to affirm, that there must be a correction for all the, like the Bantu education. I remember the minister at the time was on record as saying that the curriculum for black kids must be to prepare them for the life that they must have, which will be laborers. They were not meant to actually be educated to the level of, being more than a laborer. So it is terrible injustice. I remember a number of years ago, one of the ministers in the security of the old regime, I think it was Adrian Vlok, he got to know the Lord, and he still went to wash the feet of, I think it was Frank Chakani, somebody who he tried to murder in the old days. And then I know white people ridiculed him. But that is my heart. Like, we have to have that heart. That it was a terrible injustice done, whether you voted, whatever, but that we really, metaphorically, need to wash the feet of the people who had been oppressed. And I know it's terrible. People are the children are now suffering for the sins of the father, not like, white people saying my kid can't get a job in South Africa because they're white, they have to leave the country. And it is sad, but I understand. I mean, it's not, it is unjust in a sense now, but I wish everybody would stay and just work at this, like Nyameka said, stand in the sun together and pull together. Sorry, that was now very long.
Can I just add on something on the last part that Estelle said? Just spiritually, I also remember, or I heard, obviously I wasn't there, but I heard that the NG Kerk, when Nelson Mandela became a president, they called him. And they had this conversation. They were like, listen, we acknowledge what happened. We know what happened and we take full responsibility. Right now, as Estelle said, we probably cannot see it, but there is hope that spiritually, definitely redemption and positivity is going to come. I truly also have hope, and I truly believe that things that were done, that significance, that guy washing Frank Chikane's feet, we probably, at this point, we probably don't see the fruit of that, but we have to stand and just watch. God will work, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I don't know if you realize how vulnerable it must be in the South African context to come and share your story like this, and I want to honor both of you for sharing so wonderfully of your lives. And to also just acknowledge that the times that change came to your hearts was when you intentionally engaged relationship and took that anger or that frustration or that to the Lord, and to see what He's doing in and through your lives is very encouraging. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I know this is not church as we know it, but this is part of what the grain of our country is, and we're trusting the Lord to do new things and great things, and we need to position ourselves in a way that we can hear God's voice and be challenged. So I want to ask you, if you are sitting here and you feel a lot of emotion, but like Estelle did in when she sat in Parliament there, and she was confronted by these men that almost wanted her to repent, and there's something in you that stands up, or you're frustrated because all the sorries in the world isn't taking away your hurt, will you turn to one another just before we grab our coffee? Let's just pray for each other, and just a blessing of this journey we're on as a body, and that we trust that the Lord will start with us, start in our hearts, start in our walk with the Lord, and that from there we will see that knock-on effect that we're trusting for our country. Thank you so much for listening.